introduction and the recording, but that's okay. We'll get to the meat of the presentation and make sure that's there. So we will share this out via link with everybody who registered, so you can go back and see it. So, Aaron, take it away.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for having me, Darren, and looking forward to this conversation. Been looking forward to it for a while. We'll get into it. I was up in Madison maybe 3 years ago for a Front Porch Republic conference. It was really fascinating. It's my first time to the city and just loved it. I happened to be there right when the leaves were changing colors. It was a pretty magical time, as I'm sure all of you know. So I have a lot of affinity for the city and excited that you guys are um, having these kind of difficult conversations over how to make the city better. So um, today, my goal is to kind of fly through these slides, particularly about the reforms we did in Durham, North Carolina over the last 7, 8 years now, and talk about how that's positively affected our city in hopes that that can spark some some ideas and solutions, some of which might be copy paste from Madison, but others might be variations that you guys build upon what works and what doesn't. So I'm going to try to get through this in 30, 35 minutes at most and leave as much time for conversation as possible. Certainly like to have that local engagement and help out any way we can. So I'm talking about unpacking how Durham's small lot code reestablished our starter home market. I think very similar to Madison, we're a booming, real estate market. Obviously, the South has its own energy of growth, and keeping up with that's been a huge challenge for cities like Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, where combined with financing pressures and generally large lots, which are the standard across the country, particularly in the South, what was left was just new homes. The average price of new homes was skyrocketing, and we short circuited that in Durham, which we'll get into today. So I wanted to thank Darren and AARP for supporting this. Like you said, this is me. The advocacy nonprofit I'll get into that in a second. I am here in Durham, North Carolina. I have family roots in St. Louis and grew up partially in Ann Arbor. So I think Ann Arbor is very similar to Madison in so many ways. But Madison's a prettier city in pretty much every way, partially because of the capital, partially because of the land plan and the perfect grid. Obviously, the lakes. It's just a beautiful, beautiful city. I think that's something to consider as you guys are looking at some of these land use reforms. To give you an idea of my work is almost exclusively incremental restoration work and infill. This was a wacky project that was actually on the left is what some of you guys might remember as the Duke Lacrosse House. All my work is kind of in and around Duke University. This house came down and we built a house that was referred to as my Frank Lloyd Light. It was not by any means the level of Mr. Wright's work, but used it to see the interiors here on the right side, very much inspired by that prairie style that is sort of more common in your area of the woods than mine, and a new infill house here on the left. Lastly, one of the things that the nonprofit I work with does in the spirit of incrementalism and zoning reform, Durham had related to its small lot code reform in 2023, what I think is the best faith-based housing reform in the country, because it simply says that faith institutions can build unlimited accessory dwellings. That's it. It's very simple. And that's good in a lot of ways because a lot of faith institutions, as you know, are very interested in housing, but ADUs are inherently small. So that catalyzes a narrow, village cottage style thing where if they wanted to build apartment buildings, they still could, but it goes through the normal rezoning and sort of planning process. And so this has created an incredible wealth of opportunity in churches that are interested in doing this locally. A lot of state reform is actually following some of the work that we did here as well. All right, and then last of the bio, the nonprofit, which Darren alluded to the blog, but Southern Urbanism publishes work on practitioners building better cities, and our nonprofit also supports Better Cities Film Festival and the Big Fix Housing Initiative. Okay, so I know the Incremental Development Alliance, which I'm faculty with, has been somewhat active up in Madison and working with Darren. The basics of this organization, which if you're into the Incremental Development World. Encourage you to become a member and look at programming. There'll be a link at the end of this presentation on upcoming events. But the organization exists to train small-scale developers and coach the cities that they love. Has done events in 33 states, and just last year trained its 10,000th small developer over the past 10 years. It exists for three purposes: to train small business owners, neighborhood advocates, builders, and others to become small developers, to coach civic groups and government agencies on how to create thriving ecosystems for small developers and entrepreneurs, which is really the focus of this talk, and to connect a continent of neighborhood level doers to support each other and share field notes on what works. That's generally through field trips. So when we look at Anytown America, we see some sort of forms like this. And this like, as soon as I saw this image when I was prepping for this talk, I was like, this really looks like Madison, or the Madison that I remember when I was there a couple of years ago. Beautiful commercial buildings, Main Street buildings, all neighborhood scaled, cute, some affordable homes that a lot built in the 30s that are super, super nice. And just endless opportunities for sort of small business startup spaces, whether you're selling bagels or beads or whatever. And this is the kind of stuff that builds a city. And Madison, I think when we think of a place like Madison, it's really this kind of stuff rather than the big box sort of machine-based development. So the questions for any town like Madison is, well, who are we and what do we look like? And then kind of a bit of a shift in tone. A lot of college towns obviously have kind of had anti-development streaks for most of my lifetime, which is slowly changing. But to do that productively, there's a conversation. Somebody needs to have a conversation about who we are, what is our identity, what's our architectural styles, have people historically used those to make a great city like Madison. Critically, then how do we build more of that? And so if you have neighborhood districts like this, most of the last 50 years have not been discussing, well, how do we get four more? So the next generation or retirees or young people can experience it too. And I think that's what these conversations are really about. How do you get more buildings like these, which have been functionally made illegal in many college towns over the last 50 years? So our problems, which most people on this call should be familiar with, is that we've created a complicated and inflexible system. We have regulations that force certain types of developments, typically bigger and bigger and more institutionally financed. And there are people whose sole job is to find developable land in Madison because it, checks all the boxes of great demographics and jobs and whatever. That's hard to fight against when you're trying to do something small, local, and special. There are finance systems that encourage low-risk projects. That typically means the financiers will want your project to look like whatever was done last, right? So that discourages innovation. And over time, everything looks more and more like the year before. You do that over 50 years, we get the development environments that are uninspiring, that everybody's frustrated with. That's because it's all finance is very backward looking and not encouraging of innovation, not encouraging in the middle and so forth. And that gets into obviously the status quo bias, which people aren't happy with the status quo. So the more of it that gets built, that can sow mistrust and fear of change. Okay, so that's the background of who I am and how we got to where we are. Let's talk with what we did in Durham. Let me start with my thoughts on Madison from being there. I alluded to this earlier. Obviously, you guys have a unique and beautiful, beautiful city. Really one of maybe the most beautiful city in the Midwest, particularly in small size cities. I think one of the other things that stands out to me, I've lived in 7 college towns for weird reasons. And when I was there, I had this kind of heartwarming experience where and I don't know if this means anything when they're there, but it felt like Madison was one of the last remaining true activist towns. There was a habit in the 60s, 70s, and 80s where college towns were sort of, in many ways, the way they were supposed to be, the place where people would experiment, where people would do wacky things. where people would really fight for their view of the world. And it was a place where sort of outliers could aggregate and shake out ideas. For a variety of reasons, that's really changed. Obviously, there's a lot of performative activism out there right now on all sides of the political spectrum, but it feels like the places where interesting things are still going on, and you can disagree with somebody, but you can't accuse them of being insincere. Ann Arbor, Madison, maybe Berkeley are the only places I've been to where I felt that. That's a great thing for if you're trying to do something creative and new, or trying to do something that's uniquely of your city. That's a great baseline to work from. So I hope you guys see that and can celebrate it. You have incredible assets to work with. Your tree canopy is, second to none. Your architecture there, from just the fabric buildings of the city and the grid to the historical presence of Frank Lloyd Wright in the area. Obviously, you have strong jobs and 40,000 or however many students you have. I mean, obviously, pretty much every other city in Wisconsin would kill for any of that, let alone all of it. So these are great things to start from, and assets that should be thought about and really marshaled when you're doing new homes. Lastly, I'd love to come out, and ARP can help facilitate this, but think about who is defined. Like if growth is presumed and Madison will grow and people will want to be there, and young people want to start their businesses and families there, if that's taken as a given, then there's a conversation about defining who y'all are, what's the identity, and all of these are questions that lead into what kind of city do you want to build. So this is kind of post the conversation of we are going to build a city, we are going to grow, people want to live here. The second step is what do we want? And that's most productively a conversation about who we are and what's lovely about our history. It's duplication rather than trying to create something completely new. In most college towns, nobody's having that conversation. I can tell you that conversation is not being had in Durham and Chapel Hill. It shouldn't be that hard. They can happen through politics, they can happen through civic groups, but they need to happen because if you don't know, where you've been or where you're going, you're not going to ever get there. So I'd encourage you to do that. Okay, so here's what we did in Durham. So Durham in 2019, the city council directed planning staff to undertake a series of reforms targeted at making it easier to build low-cost starter homes. Generally, as you guys know, affordability, well, there's many inputs into affordability, but certainly if you're truly pursuing affordability, keeping subsidy out of the equation, just the definition of it is building housing for a lower cost that is then rented or sold at a lower cost. The purpose of this conversation, that's the definition of affordability. That one of the things that was targeted, or two things were targeted. One, to encourage smaller homes, not necessarily lesser bedrooms, but just smaller homes, because that's a key driver of affordability, and lower land costs, which, as we'll see, directly correlates with how big your minimum lot size is, and we'll show that in a second. So the whole key here, because our entitlement process in Durham has gotten messier over the years for a lot of different reasons, that has pushed the small incremental builders out of public process. The last I checked, it was about $150,000 to do a rezoning in our city. And so the big boys with Charlotte and New York money can do that. It's just the cost of doing business. But the small builder just can't, because again, that's $150,000 to ask a question. Ultimately, you can get rejected for a rezoning. And so all the local business, which is folks who create kind of everything that matters, and the beautiful things, the outlier things, the affordable things, the new urban things, et cetera, had to find paths to build by right, or they wouldn't build at all. So expanding housing choices was fought for by planners, politicians, local practitioners. And we really had an interesting social justice angle that I don't think would work in most towns, but did in Durham, probably might in Madison, that was very much based around the reading of The Color of Law, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Richard Rothstein's great book that talked about the history of how we got to present day zoning and how much of it is du jour based upon race. That was a huge motivator by our city council, which had a very large Black presence in a town that's about 40% Black. So anyway, this passed in 2019 and was followed, actually, we should say 2023, by another set of amendments that cleaned it up and so forth. What was in that? Couple things. Increased accessory dwelling flexibility. Now you can build accessory dwellings in Durham up to 1,200 square feet, which to my knowledge is the largest in the United States. Some other cities do 1,200 as well. It eliminated single family only zoning. You can still build a single family home. In fact, most homes that are getting built probably are. But none of these lots that were really split along race lines when they created single family only zoning in 1969, that went away. So now the neighborhoods all over the city, you can still deed restrict them if you're a new developer, but of the legacy lots, those duplexes are now allowed. And then show this on another slide, but small lots are effectively a reduction in the minimum lot size. Most of the South has 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. Some places have 7,500 square feet. This reduced it to 2,000 square feet, contingent on you building a house that was no larger than 1,200 square feet. We'll show that again if that's confusing, but it basically allows you to build more housing with smaller lots as long as those houses were relatively small themselves. Combined with that was the allowance of flag lots, which then allow you to put a house behind the existing house. And there's some controversy over that. We'll show you some how that worked. I do think that because I spent some time walking in Madison on the neighborhoods through the Increments, which were just like lovely historic districts. Most of the houses I looked at were not particularly, gaudy historic, just beautiful, a lot of 1920s, 1930s homes. And the introduction of flag lots have been useful as a way to add housing without threatening the historic fabric of the streetscape, which was really intact in remarkable ways in Madison. So messy, I get it. Some people will oppose those, but that's certainly a tool to allow housing, basically backyard housing, that can be fee simple while keeping the streetscape as it is, because it's a special thing in Madison. Okay. So the coding, again, you can do this. I don't assume how to mark up the screen here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the lot areas are reduced to 2,000 square feet. You can do up to a 1,200 square foot home that cannot be larger than 800 square foot footprint. That yielded a lot of two-story, 600 square foot up, 600 square foot down, and there's a whole suite of stock plans that local practitioners moved immediately to develop based upon this regulatory reform. I was amazed to see how many local practitioners, designers, and builders are excited about affordability. Like actually would prefer to do work in this space than build $1 million homes. And we had a plethora of designers and builders kind of work to try to figure out how to build small homes, which nobody had done for 50 years in Durham. Interestingly, on those small lots, your 1,200 square foot home, those can be a duplex. You can actually detach a duplex, so you can, which is a weird concept, but you can have two 1,200 square foot units as a duplex plus an ADU. So at a certain point, once you've got homes that are of that size on a 2,000 square foot lot, you're actually over what fits there, just geometrically. So you're getting to the point, and Portland, Oregon now is the best I've seen at this, and they're a fascinating city to study zoning reform. They're really to the point where you can just build the good thing, and it's largely unencumbered by this weird cornucopia of exclusionary zoning that have dominated our cities for the last 50 years. Portland, because of that, is getting interesting pocket neighborhoods built everywhere now. They're just the norm. And it's not encumbered by these sort of, exhausting conversations of height and setbacks and how many trees and all this stuff. From a density perspective, you can just build a good thing. And with that flexibility, incredible things are coming out of it. Okay, so in this bottom right here, this is a kind of a little bit of a screwed up graphic, but if you can imagine the street at the bottom of this flag lot under 612.5, this allows the house to be split and the house to be built in back. The goal of this with the city was to say like, well, everybody can build an ADU back there now, but you can't sell it fee simple. And that creates all sorts of problems that you could condo it, but that creates a liability tail and financing is difficult and it's not really our intent anyway. the goal was, if you can already build it by right, how do we make it easier for utilities to be done and to be sold? So, the basic principle was like renters are fine and they're not to be discouraged, but home ownership is better. If we're going to make Durham better or Madison better, we want people to have a stake. We want people to have ownership of the city. And so this was a tool to increase those opportunities. The main thing that was done, we allowed flag lots, but they were on a 20-foot wide flag pole. And that's the pole section is the part that, you can't really build upon, but accesses the lot and back. On a 50-foot wide normal lot, a 20-foot wide pole basically made the whole concept unusable. So that was reduced to 12 feet, and we've seen a lot of development happen because of that reform. All right. So this is a kind of a messy drawing, but I want to give you an example of what's possible with these reforms. This was actually a land trust property. They had bought two pretty dilapidated homes. I'm one of the last people on earth to knock down homes. I try to rehab them whenever we can, but these two were basically gone. And if you can see the red lines here, imagine that these are the lots that were available to the land trust. And so they had houses on them, which are now gone. The street here is on the left side. So those two lots were now split into, if you can see the three lots here, there's a flag lot in the top and the top right. And then there's a smaller lot here in the middle and a smaller lot at the bottom. And so what comes out of this with their goal was extreme affordability of 30, 50% AMI. That's the goal of our land trust. Now, not only have they added 7 homes, where there were 7 new homes, where there were 2 very bad condition homes, they also have the ability to catalyze some community in some way, shape, or form, because density, it's the same problem in some of the Midwest, but certainly in the South, we're so spread out. I think Durham probably is about half the density per square mile of Madison. And so bringing people together is a need for transit affordability, all the things, but also the ability to create community over some commonality, whether that's affordability or faith or some practice or something. And so in this drawing, you can see a shared green in the back. And, a key component of affordability is if a community shares one green, that green can be better, it costs less, and you can get more housing on less dirt. These are all ways that you can create something better at less cost, and that's when we're on the right path. So I think this is a lot of what we're doing in Durham, but it's the potential of a place like Madison with some reforms. You can create intentional communities that you can't under most zoning regimes of the last 50 years. Darren, I'm not actually able to see the chat, so you can if you feel like there's a need to interrupt me at any of this, please do. I'm happy to take questions as they come, or we can wait till the end. So within the expanding housing choices, there's a couple of things that really stood out. As I mentioned, ADUs were made much more flexible. They were a maximum of 800 square feet, and that's a very difficult number to make pencil. Portland had a great study that showed, first of all, there's more ADUs now built in Portland than single family homes. It's the same in Los Angeles. So in our really high demand cities, this is kind of a pattern that we're seeing. But Portland noted, because financing was really difficult and the house size is capped, kind of the only people who were able to do accessory dwellings were people who could afford to do them in cash, which is great. But there's also like a lot of middle class working people who have a home, who, teachers and so forth, who maybe have a little bit of savings, who love their city and would prefer to invest in Madison and their backyard and their neighborhood than give money to, a stockbroker or something, or whatever it might be. And so there's some key gaps to close here that are kind of beyond the scope of this call, but the financing of ADUs is really key. And it's actually an opportunity that some cities are doing innovative work in, including Durham, to kind of close the gap. So people who want to and can build housing in their community now have access to the financing to do it. That's a big deal. As mentioned, accessory dwellings are now also allowed on small lots. So you can do 2, sometimes even 3 homes on these small lots. The ADUs can be attached or detached. And we're already seeing this. There's a couple of young builders who are building small homes as not like a hobby, but their full-time career. We have people who specialize in 400 to 1,200 square foot homes, and that's what they do, and they're thriving because, from a regulatory perspective, we've effectively legalized those. With the elimination of single family only zoning, we also now have demand for duplexes. Duplexes and what's called attached homes look exactly the same here in Durham, but the attached home has the property line going down the middle of it, so it's essentially a townhome. But you can sell both of those fee simple, which is increasing demand here because our land costs are high and people want to be in close proximity to Duke and downtown. I would note that I don't think Madison's involved with building code reform like North Carolina has been, but if there's architects in this call, the residential code only covers 1 and 2 family homes, and everything above that, from a triplex to an airport, is covered under the commercial building code. So North Carolina made a state level reform to actually expand the residential code, which is much easier to build in and is less expensive to build in and is critical for building affordability, in my view. Change that to a 1 to 4 family code. And so now you can build a quadruplex under the residential code without sprinklers and extra egress requirements and some other reviews that are kind of cost prohibitive. So that's been helpful and has played out already in Durham. It's an interesting thing in the South because in New England, there's been a long history of multifamily that's mid and up market. And I think in the Midwest, there is too, sixplexes in Chicago. And my family grew up in duplexes in University City in Missouri. But in the South, multifamily has always been associated with low income. So there's a kind of a new thing, particularly in Durham, which is such a, being a college town is somewhat transient, has a lot of Midwesterners and New Yorkers that are here. There's been more demand for that, but there's like the last 5 or 10 years have seen a change where before, if you were middle class and up, the default was to never share a wall with somebody. But as we're urbanizing, that's changing, and we see it because of these reforms. And so here's a great case study. This right here is a Habitat home built roughly 10 years ago. It's kind of a big, tiny home. I think it was about 500 square feet. And it was built for a formerly homeless woman, as I understand it. Just a cute project, really great, feel-good project all the way around. And it was put on this lot in the upper right. And the site plan looks something like this. It's probably I don't know the square footage, but probably a 7,000 or 8,000, actually close to 10,000 square foot lot. The issue being under the code when it was built, the lot could only have 1 home. And this was in a pretty fast gentrifying neighborhood that had a lot of pressure and need to reduce displacement and all of that. And so what was frustrating and what was motivational to city council and planning is that from a space perspective, you could have built what's on the bottom right here and really ended up with 5 really nice homes for the habitat market or formerly homeless or just affordability or whatever. Space-wise, that fits and looks great. And you could have the same vibe and the same photo, but 5 times over. So unfortunately, this project got done before the reform. So you ended up with 1 home on 1 lot. And it actually, this photo doesn't give it justice, but looks a little weird because the house is so small on such a large lot. But that was zoning. There was no real path, a viable path to split that up. And so they kind of wasted the land in retrospect, but when you got to go, you got to go. So this underscores the need for lot size reform. And if there's one thing you guys take away from this call today, is that this lesson has been learned over and over through our local reforms. If you have a large minimum lot size, that will correlate with a large minimum house size. I'll say it again. Large minimum lot size leads to large minimum house size. So I don't know Madison's Zillow market that well. I'm sure that it's pretty rare that buildable lots come up in the desirable areas of that city. When they're so rare and there's such demand, you can imagine a builder might have to pay, if it's in Durham, $200,000 or $300,000 for the dirt because it's so rare. If they're doing, it's pretty hard to deliver a home for $300,000 when the dirt is $300,000, right? So this creates that need to be able to have more lots on that same piece of dirt, and that lowers the land cost per home, and that's a key component, huge component of delivering affordable homes. I'm going to fly through some of these photos because I want to leave times for talks, but there's been all sorts of interesting projects built. This is actually a very popular project in South Raleigh called Dorothea Gardens. Every time I've been by there, they just have the happiest residents. It's very close to downtown and Dix Park. And I could critique this architecture. I think that these are kind of pejoratively often called tall skinnies, and I've seen worse ones and better ones. But these porches that are facing the street, they just have a bunch of young families that are just engaging. Like the community sort of self-formed there and created housing costs at remarkably lower price than everything else around there. This is an interesting one as well. You guys are a college town. I don't know if anybody recognizes where this is. The picture on the right gives it away. This is student housing, if you can believe that. And student housing that was mostly built in the 80s and 90s in the poorest state or the poorest university in the SEC. This is next to Mississippi State. But catalyzed by the ability to build small homes. If Madison's anything like Chapel Hill and Durham, probably the ugliest buildings getting built today are student housing. Like there's a real sort of bottom of the barrel architectural ethic in student housing. But you can imagine Madison's a prideful place. The university is a prideful place. An opportunity to build the kind of place where, students could live like this near the university, and imagine how great that would be for the kids, but also the university. Like these are the things that's possible only when you have the reform that allows it, that catalyzes particularly young people to go after stuff like this that are absolutely possible. And if it's possible in Mississippi, it's certainly possible in Madison. Okay, so this is the comparison that sort of is the data to prove how much small homes matter. Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh are all pretty similar housing markets, all driven by a state capital, universities, meds and eds, research dollars, and so forth. Durham was kind of the tightest market for years because Duke was the main economic engine here, but also a kind of a big entrepreneurial startup culture as well. This was done 3.5 years after this reform passed. Simply search Zillow for all of the new homes for sale, detached homes for sale under $400,000. Chapel Hill had 0, Raleigh had 1, Durham had 28. Durham's about half the size of Raleigh, incidentally. And yes, Durham had the small lot code, the other two didn't. I mean, this was direct correlation for it. You allow small lots with small homes, you get them. If you don't allow them, you don't get them. And it's the correlation was absolute to be a truism. So there's a correlation between those two. And we see there's a bending of the curve when you look at the cost of new homes. Right now, the last I looked, actually, they were almost double in Raleigh that they were in Durham. It's almost created its own problem that now when a builder in Durham gets an infill lot, and now they can build 3 homes instead of 1, but these are 3 homes that are capped at 1,200 square feet. They do that. The stereotype with our normal anti-development voices just are like, oh, builders only care about profit. They're just going to build the homes for rich people. They won't build down market affordability. We've heard that over and over and over again. In fact, almost always when people get an infill lot, they're choosing to build these smaller homes. It's created its own problem where Duke faculty and staff move here who are well paid and want to live in our urban environment near walkability and all that. And they're in the market for a $600, $700, $900,000 $1 million new home. And there's almost none of them on the market because the small lot code has been so successful. So that's a problem, but probably a good one to have. And certainly from a civic perspective, the general idea from city council people are like that, trying to solve housing for a Duke surgeon is not their priority. They prefer to have done this down market thing. So it's interesting and but an effect of what we're doing here. So once to get into the idea of like what your practitioners in Madison can do is a great quote by my old architect buddy, Bill Allison. Once you understand the constraints, you can create efficient spaces and you can arrange multiple small homes to create a uniquely Southern urban experience. Same obviously applies to the Midwest. So finding out, what are the patterns in Madison? What do you guys love about the architecture or the streetscapes there? And how can you create some rules that encourage it? You're not going to hit 100% of the time. We can show plenty of architecture that is mediocre. But what if you coded something to encourage this sort of work moving forward? What would it be? And then let your architects thrive. Take the architecture kids or planning kids and let them design houses that are uniquely Madison. We have a lot of like Southern traditional stuff that actually can be easily modified for Midwest, but this is a great example. This is a beautiful home that I think you'd probably be happy to see in any of those historic districts on the Isthmus in Madison. Big front porches, just graceful small home, right? It's an up and down duplex, super simple, perfect place for a one or two people to live gracefully. Very small, but fits in a neighborhood, is unoffensive. It's a nice house, right? So this came out of the small lot reforms. We have a whole set of 600 square foot homes that are sort of in this, boxes can be really nice if they're trimmed nice and they're proportionate and they have big windows and so forth. We've got 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, etc. And what we're seeing once you enable this sort of creativity, you unshackle your small developers and architects, the next phase of what happens naturally is you create these little you can build micro communities that are targeted at very specific practices or cultures or beliefs or whatever. These are some great examples from Portland. But once you can, Ross Chapin talks about communities a minimum of 4 homes. Once you have that, you can start building around interesting things. The you know Currently, what we mostly see in college towns is either co-housing type things where people kind of share some common amenity. But what we're seeing now is tremendous demand for even think practices that are more specific than that, where you can build around a practice, whether it's podcasting, pickleball, a sports team, a religion, a hobby, filmmaking or whatever. Musicians can live around a common amenity. These are coming back, and I think in a place like Madison, where you do have such deep practice because of the university, whether somebody's interested in political activism or music at the highest level, you can build communities around that to enhance what's already kind of enhanced, and that's where Madison and college towns really start to thrive. Okay, let me fly through a couple of these tips for developing affordability in your town through small lot reform. One, if you're serious about affordability, all your solutions should focus on the residential code. Most likely in Wisconsin, that's 1 and 2 family structures. I'll show you a graphic here in the next page where you can duplicate 2 family structures to the moon, and it should stay in the residential code. But once you do a triplex in most states, now you're in the commercial code and you're unaffordable. So that matters. Conform with 30-year debt, because that's critical for your local people to go get conforming debt so they can lower the cost and deliver lower cost product. And part of staying in the residential code is you can avoid sprinklers and minimize the shared party walls that add some expense as well. So Eric Kronberg, who's a faculty member with me at Incremental Development Alliance, has really shown this with a kind of a relentless, obsessive pursuit of affordability. Talked about on your infill lots in Anywhere USA, the cheapest home, the least expensive homes you can possibly deliver is a duplex primary home up front with a duplex ADU in back. And the reason is specifically code driven. Both of those stay in the residential code because there's no more than 2 homes under the same roof. And then you can deliver the most house at the lowest cost by doing that trick. This is not allowed in many cities in America, but we're seeing it done more and more. We're actually seeing it done through a lot of state preemption. Quadruplexes by right. California's kind of got a messy implementation of this, but we're seeing more of it. And again, if relentless pursuit of affordability is your goal, you're going to end up in this ballpark with similar conclusions. Other keys to affordability from the market space: share outdoor space. Europeans who come to America must be like in awe that literally each one of us have a private park in our backyard. I get it. Like it's kind of is the America thing now. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, But if you're trying to do affordability and also build community, the ability to share those spaces, you can enhance them and make them great. That's a key component to delivering affordability. And obviously, more homes on the same amount of dirt is key, and that's the whole basic mathematic offering of the small lot solutions. So once you're doing those, you can end up with, this is a very urban concept for a place right next to Duke University, where the yellow houses are existing and it connects to already done streets through various code opportunities to create what's kind of a London Muse type product. This is possible through, again, small lot reform and to create kind of an amazing place where one currently doesn't exist. All right. Let's see. The last thing I think I want to talk about is, I don't know Madison's kind of displacement arguments, but I know that they're basically present in all college towns. And the idea is that more housing will just displace people of lower wealth, right? And this is often used by historic preservation world to prevent activity in those neighborhoods. So if we take a site right here, that this is in a neighborhood just north of Duke's campus where there's a lot of low income housing and it's under pressure, and there's definitely a lot of knockdowns and rebuilds. The homes kind of look like this one on the left, basic shotgun bungalows, nothing special, but people have lived there for years and love their community. And as those homes come down, things like the one on the right get built, right? And often bigger homes too. And so the issue from a displacement perspective, if we take somebody who's a senior, who is on a fixed income, who owns a house, maybe free and clear even, but it's falling apart because it's been 50 years or 40 years, then they don't necessarily have the ability to unlock the money to rehab their home. Or what we saw in Durham, a lot of our property taxes tripled or quadrupled. So this is a huge pressure for somebody on a fixed income. Before expanding housing choices, the only choice for that woman would be to sell the home. That's it. That's the only way to deal with the liquidity, the cash flow shortage, to stay in the home. There's just no way to cover the things. So now, with the reforms that have happened in 2019 to 2023, she could duplex the house. She could add an ADU. She could duplex the house and add an ADU. She could, and maybe the simplest one, subdivide the lot. And if she had a flag lot in back, she could sell that for liquidity to help her do what she needs to do, to retire or send her kids to college or fix the house or whatever. She could build an ADU on the flag lot. She could build a duplex on the flag lot, build a duplex and an ADU on the flag lot, or any combination thereof. So the choices that are empowering of the citizens now allow them to either thrive, flourish, add back to the community, or just survive. That wasn't really an option before these reforms. You would almost certainly have to sell that home. So that's a big deal. Lastly, I'll say new construction math is ruthless. So if you're pursuing these pursuits, know that, respect the people who have to do this stuff. You're gonna be pressured to keep things simple, to maximize revenue and minimize cost. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of cool drawings that never get built. Support your risk takers. I've definitely seen in the college towns I've lived in, there's a lot of, disdain for people who do this difficult work. There's a lot of talent in a place like Madison or Durham, but that talent often goes underground because the public process is just messy. So whenever you get a chance to find the talent you really like, thank them, invite them into rooms and so forth. That's really helpful. And I think I'm going to try to open this up for questions. And I apologize for going a little bit long. I know I want to open this up for questions, but I'll close with, these are development workshops. If you're interested in the training that IncDev does, I'll leave these up here as we go through questions. But I feel like that's an abrupt end, but what do you guys want to talk about? What questions do you have?
You have triggered a nerve. There's a lot of questions sitting in the Q&A here. So,
Good.
going back, I think when you first talked about sort of the faith-based developments, Matt writes, Madison relies significantly on property tax to cover costs to deliver municipal services. Not sure how taxation works in North Carolina. How does faith-based unlimited housing intersect with tax exemption and perhaps payments in lieu of taxation?
It's a great question. So I think it's nonprofits do not pay property tax. I think it's an incredibly dumb IRS policy, but it is our policy, and that goes nationwide. That happens. That's quality. Like just a lot of affordable home builders will build in cities like Madison and Durham and not pay property tax. There's a whole more sketchy industry of that where a for-profit will like basically partner with a nonprofit for the sole purpose of avoiding property taxes, but still control all the profits, which is definitely, in my view, skirting the spirit of the law. The whole goal, if a nonprofit like a church or a land trust owns the home, then any money that's made from those activities by law have to go back into the mission. That's the fundamental offering of a C3. And a church would be the same. So I think this is a fair critique. Right now, I don't think we're at any risk of, faith-based housing building 1 million homes in the next 10 years. So I think it's minimized, but you're right, at scale, if all of our homes are built by nonprofits, we have a cash flow problem that's created by that. Because I agree, kids in faith-based housing still go to the public schools. You still call the cops. Trash has to get picked up. I think it's an incredibly dumb rule that these institutions should be exempt. This goes for universities as well, which is a huge problem in a place like more in Durham than in Madison, because you have this huge institution that does suck some resources while also creating them, but they don't pay property taxes, and it's a valid critique.
All right, these next two go together,
Sure.
or they're by submitted two different people, but they kind of blend together. So, Christine writes, interesting concept for Ash Street. How is the outdoor common space maintained since it's all in one lot?
Yeah.
And then Ben writes, in the example for splitting to 7 homes, it looks like some shared parking is happening. Is there an association that was established to maintain that shared space? Curious how it manifests and is simpler than true condo association.
Yeah, these are both great questions, and I'm rolling backwards as I here we go. So some of this, because this project actually was really just a schematic that never got that far, I can talk speculatively on it. We do a lot of these drawings. Probably about we design a pocket neighborhood of similar sort of scale of once or twice a month now that are 5 to 10 homes, and these questions always come up. Um, I think you can do an HOA. Many of us are inclined to not do an HOA if you don't have to. It's an extra corporation. It's a corporation you own with your neighbors. We all have heard plenty of horror stories from HOAs that, it's actually, I think, one of the underappreciated reasons people pay premiums to live in historic districts outside of like the nice homes. You don't have an HOA. And actually, just like people's mental where they are in life, they prefer that to an HOA community. Virtually all new communities have HOAs for strange reasons. Often they're driven by stormwater. And now you have to have an HOA, so then now you got to have meetings and all the politics that come with that. Anyway, it's my way of saying it can be done formally or informally. You can do these through agreements or leases. If this is an all rental community, you can say that this area is on a plat. This is common space. It can be you could pay somebody, a teenager at the development to mow the lawn. You could have a professional service that comes through once a month or once a week to clean it. The parking, I think, is also, it has to be figured out, but is in nearly all of the South, well, like we just have no shortage of street parking. So most of the projects we design like this would actually have no off-street parking, and it would be fine. Even an urban street that's relatively dense by Durham standards, 10 or 20% parked, so you can park this whole neighborhood on the street fine and not really run into any shortages. So I think these are interesting questions. We call and a good problems to have because you don't have these sort of on large lot suburban sprawl that is the norm. We call it in the town building world, we break this into hardware and software. Hardware is the physical buildings and the architecture, right? And the software is how the community is programmed. And that can be HOA, can be informal. Obviously, if somebody just rents their backyard ADU, there's probably just here's a list of the rules they just give to the tenant or the guest. So it can be done. Any of those are valid and are just, decisions that have to be made. I don't think there's right or wrong ways to do it.
Great. I'm going to blend a couple of these kind of run together as well. And Matt submitted, he wants to know who talked to in North Carolina about the 4-unit residential code reform,
Sure.
specifically sprinklers and accessible unit requirements. Are people actually building 3 to 4 units or adding a third or fourth unit now that the commercial code problem is detached? And he wants to know, are you seeing an uptick in townhouse construction or other missing middle housing?
Yeah, let me see if I can remember all those.
Yeah.
You can track, although she's incredibly busy, you can track down, it's my design partner is Jennifer Truman. Reach out to her on LinkedIn. She was one of the main advocates for changing the code to 3 and 4 or for 1 to 4 family. It had failed for weird reasons twice in legislature and then got through 2 years ago, largely driven by HBA, all the building code reform kind of goes through the HBA at the state level here in North Carolina. Other states are following that, and Texas and I think Ohio have variations of it. I've heard some even go up to 8 or 12 units, but with certain other fire restrictions. So yeah, keep an eye on that. I think it's there are few reforms that could have a bigger effect on affordability and missing middle housing than that, and they're a big deal. Um, we are seeing some interest in it. The biggest challenge is that zoning code does not conform with it. So while we can build 2 units on most of these lots, 3 and 4 is still prohibited. And that creates a challenge. So we're seeing more of it. I think that there's interesting reform efforts going on now to just sort of simply say in the language that the zoning conforms with whatever the building code allows at that level, which would basically allow 4 units on some of these lots. And I get that can getting duplexes and ADUs allowed on these lots was a big lift, and it's been transformative. But I get that there's some headwinds to allowing quadruplexes everywhere. But I think that's coming, and having the building code addressed before the zoning code is actually unusual because so much reform work is targeted at zoning codes. Yeah. And I think, yeah, oh, and then we have seen more townhomes here. They're very odd. They're seeing some headwinds now. We have a lot of like bottom of the barrel townhomes in the suburban area that are struggling a little bit, but those are the most affordable homes that get built here in production. In the urban areas, they tend to be very high end, and I'm hoping new reforms will kind of allow for some urban infill mid-level townhomes, but there's weird reasons that like our 1 and 2 family homes are are exempt plat, which means they don't go through stormwater review and they're exempt from stormwater. As soon as you do a townhome, you have to do stormwater. And on any project less than 20 units, it just blows you up. So even where townhomes would look great and would be additive to the streetscape, you kind of can't do them unless you're doing them at scale. That's a purely regulatory driven as a problem.
Great, thanks. Jody wants to know, relating to flag lots, how wide does the original lot have to be to make a flag lot?
So it's a great question. It depends on the zoning, but our predominant zoning is RU5, and that has a minimum width of 50 feet. And most of our urban neighborhoods are 50 feet. And so now with the reduced whole flag lot, that can be 12, which allows for a remainder of 38. The small lot codes, which we talked about through this whole talk, can go down to 25 feet wide. They have 5 foot setbacks on each side. So if you're 25 foot wide, you're ending up with a 15 foot wide house, which is starting to get either compressed or weird, depending on your view of it. So you start playing with like what you can do and what you should do are not necessarily the same question. But that, once you start breaking up a 50 by 150 lot, you're sort of automatically in the small lot world in Durham, and then you're playing with 1,200 square foot maximum homes. And that's somewhat unique. I mean, I think that there are other cities that are kind of trying to copy it. That was one of the slides I did here. It was funny. We had expanding housing choices, which is the brand that came out of Durham. Joe Biden picked it up in some proposed reforms. San Francisco picked it up. Fannie Mae picked it up. So there's this brand. Again, it's actually a great name to describe zoning reform. Um, uh, those all came out of it. So.
All right, and then the last questions that we have here, Montavious sent a flurry of a couple of ones here. So he wanted to know, what was the social justice angle for reforms, and was there a convener for the reform advocates?
That's a great question. I think the convener, we were blessed to be led by a really strong mayor, Steve Schewel, who had a long history in social justice and leadership in the Democratic Party. He's in his 70s now. He founded the Activist Weekly paper, which has been, one of the primary news sources in the Triangle since the 80s, probably. And the main angle was, Durham's town is 40% Black. After the 1960s saw incredible displacement in the Black communities because of urban renewal and the freeway going through simultaneously, displaced, from what I could see, about 4,000 Black families, which is a lot. And that coincided with the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The primary reform of the Fair Housing Act was that you could no longer discriminate based upon race or the color of people's skin. Meaning in 1967, if somebody Catholic or Black came to your door to rent, you could tell them no because they were Black or Catholic. In 1969, you couldn't do that. And what we documented was an incredible expansion of exclusionary zoning as a direct response of the Fair Housing Act. So neighborhoods that did allow 80 homes per acre now down to 8 or 9. And it was mostly a way of technocratically making sure that the substantial amount of displaced Black families from federal policy had limited access to get into wealthier neighborhoods. That's a longer story, but I think that was validated by, if you've read The Color of Law, it's 300 pages of these stories, and if you haven't read it, read it. And we had a majority on city council who got it, who bought into it and wanted to act with these values. I don't, outside of deep blue cities like a Berkeley, Madison, or Ann Arbor or Durham, I don't think that strategy works, but that was what our council cared about. And they passed it. If you read Steve Schul's language when he passed this, it was saturated in social justice. This is the right thing to do. And he wasn't looking for credit. He just said, this is the right thing to do.
Great. And then lastly, Montavious asked, how long did it take for the large home developers to switch to building smaller homes?
I think they mostly didn't. It was really infill developers who were a specialist. We still have a lot of sprawl, and probably different than most of the Midwest. North Carolina is really growing fast. And so the large home developers tend to be sprawl oriented, and some of them are building million, $2 million homes. I know the infill game is harder and it's kind of a slog, and you have to deal with, weird politics and weird engineering, public works, and so forth. I think a lot of it, it takes somebody who's pretty determined to do good work to do infill because it's harder. So we see a lot of people sort of default after fighting that knife fight for years to just like, you know what, it is easier to build big homes for rich people than to do infill work. And I've seen a lot of builders who start trying to do the difficult, smaller work just eventually sort of go hit the easy button. So I don't think from an infill perspective, I know people who, there's probably 10 or 15 of us who are in a builders guild who, 10 years ago probably would have built a 2,000 square foot home that today would sell for 800 grand. And the majority of those have switched over to building three $450,000 homes or $500,000 homes on that same lot. And I don't know that it makes more. I don't think it's definitely more headache to build three small homes and deal with three transactions and all that, and the subdivision and utilities and so forth. But I think people are they're more motivated by that. Not everybody, but a lot.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Aaron, thank you for sharing your knowledge, and thanks for all that joined us today. Just a reminder, we've got a full week's worth of events coming up ahead of us. So tonight at 5:30 at the Tinsmith is 6 Minutes, One Idea, Perspectives on Madison. So great local storytellers got to share their experience. Thursday is an in-person event at the Tinsmith as well. It's our housing forum. And Friday is our ADU open house, as well as great webinars tomorrow and Friday as well. So hope to see you at more Housing Week events. Thank you all.
Thanks, Darren.